Concord was the world's first iconic airliner and one of the most technically ambitious projects in aviation history. When the Concord program was launched, it was to be the next giant leap forward in air travel. Billions were spent on its development over a span of more than a decade. Many believe that mass supersonic commercial air travel would be commonplace by the end of the 1970s. So in this video, we are going to talk about why everyone couldn't afford to fly Concord airline. The video is going to be amazing, so make sure you stick to the end. It was able to transport roughly 100 passengers at a time at a maximum speed of over twice the speed of sound. Yes, really. For example, a flight from London to New York would take upwards of 8 hours on a regular aircraft today, but back in the days of the Concorde, that time would be more than cut in half. During a British Airways flight in February 1996, the Concorde flew from New York JFK to London Heathrow in just 2 hours, 52 minutes, and 59 seconds. Of course, traveling that fast didn't come cheap. Each flight cost a few $1,000s. Flying on a Concorde jet wasn't for the average American. In 1976, 4 Concorde routes were rolled out. British Airways operated a London to Bahrain and London to Washington Dulles service. Air France also ran a service to Washington Dulles from Paris. In addition, Air France started a Paris to Rio de Janeiro service via Dakar and a Paris to Caracas flight via the Azores. In 1977, it cost £431 to fly one way on the Concorde between London and Washington. Adjusted for inflation, that's about £2,431 in today's money. The high cost of fares was one reason the Concorde went out of business. As the years passed, the fares got higher. By the end of the 1990s, you'd be looking at $6,000 one-way fares to cross the Atlantic in a few hours. The Concorde rarely filled up at these prices. It said half the people flying Concorde were on freebies or upgrades. In the end, the Concorde became a costly promotional plane for British Airways and Air France. 20 Concorde planes were built in France and the UK, 6 prototypes in development aircraft, and 14 service planes which were operated by Air France and British Airways. Operating a supersonic jet required tons of fuel, and as a result, there were highly expensive operating costs for each flight. Before we move on, support us by hitting subscribe and the bell icon to get notified when we post new videos. Now, let's get back to our topic. The most fuel-efficient consumption rate for the Concorde was at its cruising speed of twice the speed of sound, but even then, the Concorde still consumed 25,625 liters of fuel per hour. Using the afterburners on the engine of the Concorde especially consumed high amounts of fuel in just a short period of time. Just taxiing to and from the gates cost the Concorde a shocking 2 tons of fuel. To cover the cost of fuel, airlines operating the Concorde had to charge unreasonably high airfares for passengers on board. Since very few people could afford to spend so much money on a single flight, the Concorde wasn't able to attract too many customers and generate profit from the airline. In addition to the operating costs, the Concorde also had high maintenance costs when it was on the ground. People tend to get all misty-eyed about the Concorde. It was small, cramped, and featured seats so narrow they would shame Ryanair. The Concorde aircraft featured carbon fiber brakes and fly-by-wire controls. This might not sound impressive as they are the norm today, but during the 1960s, this was a technological marvel and decades ahead of Airbus, who made this technology mainstream. Concorde aircraft's signature feature, apart from the wings, is probably its long, drooping nose. This innovation allowed the aircraft to be streamlined during the flight, but could be dropped lower to give the pilot a good field of vision during takeoff and landing. This interesting design feature made the Concorde airplane and its company instantly popular among the media and passengers. In July 2000, a Concorde plane took off from Paris and tragically caught fire on its left wing. The plane crashed and killed 113 people. That was the beginning of the end for the Concorde. It would retire 3 years later in 2003 due to a lack of demand and rising maintenance costs. Ever since its demise, air travel has lagged. However, there may be a bit of good news on the horizon. Per Secret London, American Airlines, United Airlines, and Virgin Atlantic have already placed orders on what's being dubbed the Overture model. Created by aviation startup Boom Supersonic, its website defines the Overture model as the world's fastest airliner, optimized for speed, safety, and sustainability. In 2016, Branson announced the plans to launch a new supersonic passenger jet dubbed Concorde 2, which it is claimed will be able to speed from London to New York in just 3.5 hours. The entrepreneur is working with American startup Boom to develop the XB-1 supersonic aircraft, said to be the fastest civil aircraft ever made. In September 2017, U.S. space agency NASA and aircraft manufacturer Lockheed Martin revealed they have plowed $290 million into developing the QSST jet, which could fly across the Atlantic in 3 hours and be much quieter than Concorde. In 2021, NASA released a time-lapse video of construction work on QSST dubbed Son of Concorde. According to their website, NASA will officially take delivery of the aircraft from Lockheed Martin in 2023. According to Boom Supersonic, the Overture models are expected to begin trials by 2026. If all goes well, they should be ready for public flights by 2029. While these aircrafts will hold slightly fewer passengers than the Concorde, there will be more routes available. Boom Supersonic is gearing up to have its Overture models fly more than 600 routes around the world in as little as half the time. New York decides to celebrate its final ever departure, as it sprayed the plane with red, white, and blue water depicting the British, French, and American flags. Relatively dangerous is perhaps underselling the dangers passengers faced. Speaking of accidents, the Tu-144 had 2 accidents in its short lifespan that severely dented Soviet political and public confidence in the jet. The most famous is the crash at the 1973 Paris Air Show, with the long-standing reasoning behind the crash being the Tu-144 tried to avoid a spying French Mirage fighter. A second accident took place in 1978 with an aircraft that was on a test flight before being delivered to the Russian airline Aeroflot. The Museum of Flight Aviation Pavilion houses a model of a prototype Concorde G-Bogue. This Concorde prototype was built in November 1980, but after it was completed, no customers would purchase the model. It was eventually bought by British Airways through a transfer contract. They kept it for 6 months while G-Bogue was being restored at Filton Airfield in Bristol, England. Concorde holds the record for the fastest transatlantic airliner flight from New York to London and the fastest airliner circumnavigations going both east and west. When the Concorde G-Bogue made its last flight to the Museum of Flight in Seattle in November 2003, it set the fastest New York to Seattle record, going supersonic over the Canadian wilderness with special permission. Ben Lord of the Save Concorde group said it was probably more advanced than Apollo 11, which put the first men on the moon. The longest-serving Concorde pilot, Jacques Lau, also the former president of the Royal Aeronautical Society, said no military plane came anywhere close. It was so maneuverable and there was so much spare power. Even ex-fighter pilots weren't used to it. The time we took it to the Toronto International Air Show, 750,000 people turned out to watch. I'll never forget that sight. Lau recalled a time when air traffic controllers instructed the pilot of an SR-71 Blackbird, a high-altitude spy plane, to get out of the way because a Concorde was coming through for a landing. The 2 spacesuit-clad pilots were made to give away to a passenger just full of celebrities and champagne-sipping businessmen. Such was the esteem given to the Concorde. A plane that had fewer pilots than the United States has had astronauts. Despite this, and despite the high fares, the Concorde retains a glamour few contemporary airborne products can match, like a pair of too tight shoes that look great but are hopelessly impractical. There were always people out there who would open their wallets to try on the Concorde, no matter what the cost. So, that's it. Please like, share, and comment your thoughts below if you liked this video. Remember to subscribe to see our next video. Stay safe, and we'll be back soon with another video.